Councillors and those in the gallery, all those that wish to stand, will pass to Scott Dunlop to do the meeting prayer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Evening, everybody. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you as the Lord of heaven and earth and the sustainer of all things. We thank you for the prosperity and stability that you've given to Tamworth and for the great community and freedom we enjoy. Please continue to have your hand upon us, and thank you for recent great rain. We pray that our community leaders will continue to build and strengthen our community, especially the councillors and staff of Tamworth Regional Council. Please give them great wisdom and unity, that every decision would be full of integrity and equity for the advancement of our region and community. We ask these things in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Councillors, during the meeting open, I'll call for apologies and leaves of absence. We have two apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Stephen Mears and an apology from Councillor Mark Sutherland. Could I have someone move and second? Move Councillor Betts, seconded Councillor Burke, that we accept those apologies. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Moving on to item 2, community consultation. Councillors, we have one speaker tonight, Mr Peter Gill, to speak on 6.1, notice of motion. I'd like to invite Peter to the rostrum to please do the presentation.
Councillors, staff and members of the public, I've made no reportable political donations. I speak for the motion. This issue has existed for some time and has now surfaced and caught many by surprise. I see this matter falling into the following component parts. Event-based demand, that'll be short-term, hotels, motels, B&B, caravan parks, camping and home hosting. There's a work-based demand, which is a short to medium term, probably sits with hotels, motels, caravan parks, rentals, B&B. Construction works are probably the biggest contributor in that field at the moment. And then there's a residential-based demand, longer term, which is filled by rentals, housing and probably caravan parks. In my view, the vast majority of these facilities are provided by the private sector. Many factors are outside the direct control of council and sit at higher levels of government, both state and federal. What I advocate is making the results of this workshop public and exhibit them for public comment. Better planning and coordination around the short-term events. There's been some discussion on that. And that's council-sponsored, using existing council staff to coordinate the accommodation and home hosting without fee or charge. I think in the past we've actually done it for country music. That should happen. Work with the not-for-profits to facilitate their endeavours in and providing housing and emergency accommodation. Review construction work approvals and, where possible, insist on camp accommodation for the larger projects as a condition of approval. I would also suggest writing to state planning on this issue for any SSI projects that come along. Rather than loosening development processes, provided certain conditions are met, approvals can be fast-tracked, i.e. using a deemed to comply process. And where objective evidence is to be provided by the proponent. What I don't advocate is loosening community environmental outcomes or the exhibition or approval process. I don't advocate the use of council funds unless a full cost recovery is made. The particular issue with large construction projects is the deference of companies to the lower cost option of town-based accommodation in lieu of providing camp accommodation. Some even defer to just providing a LAFA allowance to their employees and leave them on their own for them to sort out. Whilst there's much noise about shortening and streamlining approval processes, how much of this derives from the proponents submitting inadequate proposals, causing a multi-step process in the evaluation? Just in the case of Arcadia as a case in point, I note that 7 years on, a lot is yet to be commenced. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We only had one member speaking in community consultation tonight, so we'll move on now to item 3, minutes from the previous meeting. Could I have somebody move their true and correct record? Councillor Coates, seconded Councillor Ryder. Any questions or any changes in relation to those minutes? I'll put the recommendation there, true and correct record. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. We move on to item 4, disclosure of interest. Do we have any disclosures of interest tonight? Councillor Southwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a non-pecuniary and less than significant disclosure in relation to item 9.2. My uncle Mark Stuss is the chair of the Pyallamore Rec Reserve and I'll be staying in the room. Thanks.
Thank you. Further disclosures? There being no further disclosures, we'll move to item 5, Merrill Minute. There is no Merrill Minute. We'll move to item 6, 6.1. Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The reason I've actually put... Sorry, Mr Mayor.
Move.
Yes, sorry, I will.
Do we need a seconder?
Move
Councillor
Thank you. The reason I've put forward this notice of motion is really to start a conversation around short-term accommodation availability and security as we go forward. Tamworth Regional Council has worked towards building a strong tourism and events sector, a nighttime economy, and even developing a One More Night campaign that contributes to this end. There has also been significant investment in sporting and eventing infrastructure to attract large-scale events to our region. We offer high-class hockey, basketball, netball and tennis facilities, to name just a few, as well as equine events at ALEC and entertainment and conference at Trek to attract high-level events. In addition, we have some incredible built and natural tourist attractions, a very big country music festival, Taste, the Estel Appeal, and in the background, Tamworth Regional Council staff continue to work on new events and attractions for the future. An accommodation, be it temporary for very large projects or long-term housing, is an issue in many local government areas at the present time. Under the current conditions, locally, according to some local short-term accommodation providers, there is a sufficient supply to meet current demand most of the time. According to the Tourist Visitor Information Centre, there is approximately 5,000 beds in Tamworth, and if you look at the wider LGA, there's around about 6,000. But that includes all types of accommodation from Airbnb, cabins, hotels, motels, caravans, etc. So my notice of motion is in regards to the impact that temporary accommodation may have on the short-term accommodation availability going forward. Think for things such as tourism, conference and events. For example, should there be another 1 or 2 companies take up large numbers of hotel rooms as they are the only option to accommodate their workers, what impact will that have on the short-term accommodation for tourism and events? We may well have good availability during average weeks and weekends, but during high demand times when these bigger events, conferences are being held, we already struggle to provide sufficient rooms and beds. There have been comments made around the fact that Tamworth Regional Council should coordinate events so that they are more evenly spread throughout the year. Unfortunately, this is not always possible, as the scheduling of such things as large sporting events is usually governed by the organisations themselves or the timing of regional, state or national events and how our locally held events fit into a bigger picture. We all acknowledge the Tamworth region, like many other regions, has a housing crisis, which in turn contributes to our ability to attract and retain the essential workers needed in our local businesses and industries. As a council, we need to and are looking at ways we can assist in facilitating the solution to this. I certainly don't have the answers or full understanding of the current accommodation situation, how it all works together and what is needed into the future. But I do have a strong desire to ensure that our tourism and events remain strong into the future, even after the temporary wave of construction and renewable energy accommodation demands have passed. However, I believe that between the various areas of council and the relevant stakeholders in our region, there is knowledge and understanding that can place us in a much better informed and secure position to determine this. So tonight is not about identifying a solution, but about an agreement to obtain the relevant information to provide a workshop to councillors on the current status of accommodation needs and demands and availability. This will then open the way to putting the relevant stakeholders in the room to determine the potential issues, to outline possible solutions and define a way forward. So I think it's important that this is not about a solution. We're not looking at options. It's about, can we actually look at our current status, what we may need into the future and how we can best address that to maintain and retain what we've spent years building up in terms of tourism and events and things like that that bring other aspects to our community while we're getting through this current and potentially the next couple of years, the demand on our short-term accommodation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Coates. Anyone wish to speak against the Councillor Ryder?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that this motion wants us to dedicate council resources to a problem that is not ours to solve. I believe we need to stay in our own lane and work on the things within council's remit. As many people would say to me, roads, rubbish, rates, parks and gardens, curb and guttering, footpaths and pools. This has the odour of one of those unfunded mandates that Councillor Betts often mentions. I believe the best thing we can do as a council to alleviate the housing crisis is, expediently as possible, approve more land to be developed when it comes before us and find a way to fill our shortage of planning staff. I don't believe this motion achieves those things. Yes, we need more planning staff, but this motion seems to be focused on short-term accommodation problems. No potential planning employee is going to pack themselves up and move to Tamworth to live in a motel room or any other short-term accommodation place. Is the reason we can't attract enough planning staff to fill the jobs we have available because they have nowhere to live, or is it because there is a shortage of qualified planning staff everywhere? Or perhaps conditions of employment and remuneration are better elsewhere? I believe it is the latter. This motion is trying to conflate and pretend that a council's interests as a public body are exactly the same as NGOs and short-term accommodation providers who operate in the private market. Then try and marry it all together in a motion that wants to use council resources to somehow smooth out or equalise over time the supply and demand of accommodation, like some form of top-down command economy Politburo. I fear this motion has more to do with private operators believing that Airbnb-style accommodation is creating an oversupply in the quieter months, thus pushing down prices and then wanting to get us as councillors to allocate ratepayer resources and time to somehow equalise that market by who knows what methods. Point 1 of the motion specifically mentions accommodation gaps. It is not our job to fill these private market gaps if that is what is being suggested. Point 2, home hosting, caravan hire and similar. Surely we aren't going to be asked to start our own local version of an Airbnb because this has nothing to do with council. Point 3, identify what council needs to do, facilitate, support and achieve that objective. I couldn't find an objective. The only transitive verbs I see in this motion are identifying the gaps and holding a workshop. They are not objectives, they are processes leading to an objective and to be still defined processes. Perhaps if these short-term accommodation providers have a problem with Airbnb-style businesses within our region, they should do some research and then make an appointment to go and see their local state member whose former Liberal National Government passed laws in 2020 effectively sanctioned the legality of providers like Airbnb. However, I am not without empathy for the motels and other accommodation providers of Tamworth either, in what giant foreign-owned multinationals like Airbnb are doing to the local housing and accommodation markets. I know of other councils that have made it a policy to effectively double the rates of homes and units that are providing short-term accommodation style services within their local government areas. Perhaps we should be looking at something like that. I also realise the need for more housing options which are obviously in short-term supply. I would be willing to support a completely separate motion at the next council meeting to investigate the practical and legal aspects of such a policy and if it can be or should be implemented. The real reason we have a housing crisis is because the federal government is allowing over 600,000 immigrants into this country every 12 months. We have a housing and cost of living crisis, but this additional immigration intake is creating a severe vertical fiscal imbalance between each tier of government, but the burden is especially upon state and local governments. This again is something as a council we have no control over, and trying to interfere in the private market to solve it on behalf of private operators is something we should not be doing, and that's why I would oppose this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Wright. Further speakers? Councillor Betts.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I will be supporting this motion for the fact that to hold a workshop, because discussions on the workshop is, to me, crucial to understanding what the actual impacts are. But I totally agree with my fellow councillor, Councillor Rodder, that it's not to provide accommodation, it's not a local government issue. But to have a workshop and to look at these issues, I will support this motion for that reason. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Tickle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did each way on this one. Actually, normally, as you know, I'm quite definite one way or the other. I guess that Councillor Betts summarised it all. I just had a few points, having worked in this space for many years and done consultancies in this area too, dating back to 30 years ago. Some of these issues that are raised here are nothing new, actually, and sort themselves out as we go along. And sure, things are different today to 30 years ago. They're different than what they were 10 years ago. However, the underlying problems are evident right through, and that is in peak times we don't have enough beds. Hence we started home hosting. When I say we, community, the private sector started home hosting many years ago in peak times, not only for country music but for sporting events as well, and that worked very well. Well, then came Airbnb and the home hosting faded away, but of course it could be a possibility of doing that again. And I'm not sure what happens in the sporting with sporting groups and when big carnivals are on, but again, there used to be a call for families to bill it. And when I say used to, I know as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, so I'm sure it still happens now, but I'm not in that space at the moment. But billeting in these peak times too, we have very little control over when the sporting bodies come, because they want to come around a long weekend or in school holidays or whatever. We also know, and I believe over the years and still now, that our staff work very hard to fill the gaps. It's well known February and July are the quieter months in not only accommodation but retail, hospitality, tourism across the board. That's why the government was so excited when Taylor Swift was here in February, late February, created economic activity. So I think we all have a responsibility to do something. And our motels are only 65% occupancy all year round. I mean, they've taken it hard. So if they can accommodate workers all year round, let them go to it. They're operating in private space. They're private enterprise. So I have no problem with that. Construction workers, sure, they want to take motel beds for 3 months. Sure, I have a family member who relocated for work to another regional centre, stayed in a motel 3 months until they sorted out a house to buy. I don't believe we've got a total housing crisis. There's for sale signs all around town and lease signs too. So again, I think it's in certain sectors, certain demographics that we might have a crisis there. We've also had numerous workshops on housing and the housing crisis and what we can do. We've had Business sectors involved, we've had community representatives involved, we've had council. I've personally been to 3. So, sure, we might need to have the results of those, but again, I don't know that we need a workshop for that either. So I think I'm leaning towards not voting for it, I'm sorry, because I feel that we have data. We know how many beds we've got. I didn't know there was 7,000. That must include all the Airbnbs. My last count was about 3,500 with motels, caravans, and excluding bed and breakfast. And as we've heard, not bed and breakfast, Airbnbs have exploded, and it's part of this overall problem. We've done a lot of work with council already on the housing crisis. I'm hesitant to agree to more resources being spent on it, actually, so I'm going to be voting against it. I've just decided.
Councillor Southwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of comments from my perspective. I think Councillor Coates' intentions are very good here, but I don't disagree with Councillor Rodda's comments in this instance. I think that a lot of what's highlighted here is outside of our remit in terms of our local government and what we are needing to do. In keeping in mind, the main thing that we do need to do is in terms of the planning and making sure that our planning timeframes are adequate within our region, and that is something that was raised in the General Manager's Performance Review, which we have talked about before, and we are waiting on a report from the General Manager around how we can brainstorm that. So I think that's been dealt with, and it's an ongoing issue that we're trying to solve. It's not an easy issue to solve, but it is something the General Manager is working on, and the team and the planning team. And I think that is really where we sit as a local government. We need to make sure that our planning timeframes are tight, that land is opened up for new developments and new housing. I think some of the other space is a little bit outside of our scope, and for that reason I won't be supporting the motion. Thanks.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't really going to speak to this motion. I thought it was fairly self-explanatory and certainly not sinister. The problem I think that is being expressed is about the urgency, more so than having a workshop. Look, I think that it's not just a Tamworth problem, it's an Australia-wide problem, particularly in major regional centres outside our cities, that we do lack enough accommodation, and particularly for cities like ours, it's growing at a much faster rate than other larger centres. And we've only got to look at the Global Gateway and the industrial park to see, in terms of the industrial side, let alone the housing developments, where we're headed to and what it looks like in terms of being able to accommodate these extra workers. In addition to the migration away from the major cities, looking for a tree change and better alternative living. And it's in that context I will support the motion, and that means it's probably going to be 3-3, and throw it back to you, Mr Mayor, but I think that there's goodwill and intent in this, and I think the information that will be gleaned, particularly from item 1, what are our gaps, what have we got looking ahead, and particularly the conflicting needs of sporting events, which are very short-term in their nature, versus the long-term ones with regards to the building. So I will support the motion.
Councillors, can I just make a comment? We are working very, Paul in particular, tirelessly on some of the solutions for some of our problems. We've got a number of issues that we face. We are looking at worker accommodation into the future, not so much now, but into the future. There's no problem at the moment with worker accommodation, but into the future, if the renewable energy industry starts to grow projects over the next 2 to 3 years, there will be some issues. We will have to work out how that's going to be dealt with, and we need to be part of a solution for that. We don't need to be the solution, but we need to be one of the, I guess, conveners of trying to find solutions with private industry to do something about that. We've then got social housing, which is a problem, and there's a massive shortage of that across the nation, and of course that is here in Tamworth as well. We've also got a problem with affordable housing, a nationwide problem again, and of course general housing again, and the cost of housing is being impacted on by quite a lot of government legislation that's come into being in recent times, and forcing up the pricing of houses. So there is a real lot of challenges at the moment. The General Manager's been working very hard to try and identify parcels of land and working with other councils to identify parcels of land across the wider region so that we can work with the government into the future to try and find areas where we can actually encourage people to develop housing solutions for the worker accommodation when the renewable energy comes, and it is going to come, whether that be in Tamworth, Uralla, Walker, Armidale or wherever. So that's that side of the picture. Here in Tamworth we're working with Landcom, the local Aboriginal Lands Council, New South Wales Department of Housing. Who else we working with on that? Crown Lands, and we're working together on some projects that are looking very much like they're going to be moving forward over the next 12 to 18 months. That is going to happen. In terms of the shorter term accommodation, we have no real control over motels, caravan parks or what have you, but it is something that we probably need to sit down and talk about into the future. I think what we need to do is have our housing strategy in place, and that needs to come hopefully within a reasonable period of time so that we can actually make some decisions as a council about approaching the government for some funding for some of the housing that we're talking about here now for short and medium term workers. That's something that needs to happen, and but we need to have that housing strategy in place before we do that. I'm going to a housing conference in Forbes in a week's time, and I'll be interested to see what comes out of that conference and what comes out of that from the ministers that are going to be speakers at that conference about where we're heading into the future, not just in Tamworth but as a state. And I think that's very important that we stay on top of that. And I think if we're going to move forward in that way, I would like to think that after some of those things fall into place, then we have some conversation through workshops or what have you, when we've got all that information in front of us. So the urgency is not there at the minute in my mind, but it will come if we don't do something into the future. And I'm talking about the medium future, like maybe 12, 18 months' time. We need to have some stuff in place. But I would ask Councillor Coates if she would consider what I've just said and thinking about that rather than having a workshop as a matter of urgency, thinking about let's get some of these things in place before we actually sit down around the table and we've got something to talk really with some guts in it to talk about.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to my fellow councillors for your input on my notice of motion. It really was to commence a conversation, and I am aware in terms of some of what's going on in the background, and I know we're working very hard to try and identify pockets of land and get infrastructure in place for housing. This notice of motion was merely to ensure that in the short term we had the capability to actually continue to accommodate the people that are needing to come and want to come to town for various events. I think the other thing too is that I agree with Councillor Rodder, it is not our remit to be doing that kind of thing. However, I feel that given all the work we've done in terms of building up our tourism and our event businesses, that we should be making sure that we can actually meet those obligations. So the notice of motion was merely to try and look at how things are actually progressing. Do we have to do anything? Is the urgency, 12 months away, or is it not really an urgency? So having said that, Mr Mayor, yes, I'm quite happy for that to go ahead. I would like to be updated, as I'm sure my fellow councillors would be, as to what's happening particularly in the construction worker and the demands for process working and things like that, and so that we are not going to be taking up large amounts of our short-term accommodation. It was not about trying to fill the gaps or smooth out the other issues that lie with private accommodation. Definitely was not about that. It was just ensuring that we could look at what was happening and to ensure that we actually can meet those obligations that we've worked so hard to build for our community. Thank you.
Thanks, councillor Coates. Well, we've all spoken on it, but
That closes the debate.
that closes the debate, so I was going to give you some advice on something else, but okay, that's closed the debate. So we'll have to vote on it. Those in favour, say aye. Those against? Lost. Bugger. It's okay. Councillors, we'll move on to item 7.1. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Move councillor Southwell, seconded councillor Rodder. Would you like to speak to that, councillor Southwell?
No, thank you.
Anyone wish to speak against that recommendation? Anyone wish to make comment on that recommendation?
Yes, please.
Councillor Dickett.
I can't let this opportunity go by. We had one fortnight ago as well. Evergreen Way, what's that going to imply? Hopefully it's going to imply that we're going to have lots of crews in that neighbourhood and in that avenue. It's catching on out there.
Well done.
Further speakers? Councillor Bird.
Mr Mayor, in the same context of Councillor Tickle talking about conjuring up images of greenery, we also have a history in Tamworth of, I think, a cemetery being called the Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. So I just make sure that we understand that that is also something that could be conjured up.
Thank you. Further comments? If there be no further comments, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Councillors, we'll move on to item 8.1, and I would ask if somebody could move. I think you've all got a copy, perhaps, of a recommendation there that we defer for consideration, providing additional financial information to support the Murray-Darling Association 24 conference. And there's a reason for this. That is that today I have been, Bruce and myself had a meeting with the Murray-Darling Basin Association. We have had some significant sponsors for this particular conference, and I think we need to reassess our situation after we put that sponsorship money together and work out whether or not the association will need further financial support from the council. The other item 2 in that recommendation is authorise the Mayor of the Tamworth Regional Council to attend the 2024 Murray-Darling Association conference and the annual general meeting. So if somebody would like to move that, Councillor Betts, seconded to Councillor Burke. You want to make comments on that,
No.
Councillor Betts? Anyone wish to speak against that? That's up on there, is it?
Yes.
Anyone wish to speak against that? Any further comments on that? Councillor Rodder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I note via a GIPA request, and I'm happy to table the email, that a mayor from an adjoining council invited Santos Limited to be a sponsor of the 80th National Conference of the Murray-Darling Association to be held in Tamworth. And as you know, this year the Murray-Darling Association is promoting the conference as the future of water security. For those that don't know, Santos Limited is proponent of one of the state's most greatest and I believe environmentally reckless gas projects within the Pilliga State Forest. It will be detrimental to groundwater around Narrabri Pilliga State Forest, but worse, the company wishes to establish gas extraction wells within our great food and fibre bowl in the Liverpool Plains, which, as you know, is our nation's best biophysical strategic agricultural farmland. Farmland that is largely drought-proof, even in the worst droughts. Now, I realise that the Liverpool Plains is not in our LGA, but I think we need to think about the optics of hosting the 80th Murray-Darling Association Conference aimed at discussing the future of water security, and yet a corporation whose actions will compromise the water security and irreplaceable farmland of nearby farmers and farming communities is to be invited to this conference as a sponsor. My question is, what can we do to stop this absurdity from occurring? Because I believe we need to stand by our farming communities wherever they may be.
Councillor Ryan. That's probably a very different situation to what I'm talking about. So I don't know how to answer that. But what I will say is that that particular organisation as a sponsor was not what I was talking about today. And I was talking about the CSIRO and a number of other water groups that are water users that are going to be those sponsors. So I think if you wanted to raise that, Mr General Manager, can you want me here? I'm just not sure how to take that. It's a little bit out of context with what we're talking about.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. I think you're right. I think it's a fair comment by Councillor Rodder, but the Murray-Darling Association operates as its own body and has its own governance mechanism. So it's not the council to tell them who they can and can't have as sponsors. They've obviously somehow aligned their own values as an organisation with the sponsorship that they've attracted. From council perspective, our resolution was that we would host the conference. We didn't know about the sponsorship arrangements at that point in time. We figured it was a good thing to hold in Tamworth, both from the economic outcomes and also the spotlight that it puts on our own water issues. As the Mayor has said, this report is really just dealing with the level of contribution that our community is making towards hosting that particular event. So the deferral of this, while I acknowledge the comments that Councillor Rodder's made, the deferral of this is really just about a financial sponsorship arrangement as opposed to the governance mechanisms around the Murray-Darling Association.
And Councillor Rodder, to further those comments, if you wish to speak about that, you should write to the Murray-Darling Association. I'll give you that contact there if you wish to write about your concerns in relation to that. But it is nothing to do with Tamworth Regional Council, nothing to do with the notice of motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Further comments, Councillor Southwell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you, I just had a question for our General Manager. I understand that this is allowing our Mayor to attend, but as it is based in Tamworth, it's a really great learning opportunity for some of our team. And I understand that wouldn't have to go to council, but I guess the question is, are there other councillors who may be interested or other directors? I'm guessing the directors don't need this to go through, but just wanted to make a comment around it's a fantastic learning experience. There is obviously no travel or accommodation costs associated with some of our team attending, and I'm hoping that we'll take up the opportunity as a learning experience to possibly send some of our water team or others who may have that water background who may want to attend.
Councillor Southwell, at a future meeting, not too far distant future, we'll be talking about what other councillors may show interest in attending that conference. Will be staff as well. Thank you. Further comments? I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Councillors, we'll move on to item 8.2. Productivity Commission. Did I have a mover and a second? Moved Councillor Cates. Seconded Councillor Betts. Councillor Cates, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will just make a couple of comments, and what I'd like to say is that the written submission that's been made by Tamworth Regional Council is well written and quite logical, and I fully support that. And a couple of things that come to mind out of the report is the point about the whole of investment life cycle funding model. If something can be, if anything is reviewed in terms of funding, I think having read the report, it may give us a better opportunity to have more equity and more equality in the funding arrangements that are there. But a couple of things come out of that. There was also in regards to the pensioner rebates. And I had to ask, why do state-owned corporations receive the full support of the state government when local water utilities have had to increasingly support the rebates from their own funds? And that's in regards to the pensioner rebates. Also, I make a note that the purpose of community service obligations in the context of the National Water Initiative is to provide for a basic level of service for more remote regional communities where full cost recovery is not viable. However, given that Sydney Water and Hunter Water are neither remote nor small, and yet they receive, my understanding is, fairly large CSOs. So I feel that, in the report and the submission, if we were highlighting that, I think it would be good to actually find out a bit more about that. So thank you.
Anyone wish to speak against? Further comments? Councillor Betts?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. When the Director, Mr Logan, asked us to comment whether we should submit a response, I wholeheartedly put the response that we should, because I've seen in my career in local government similar sort of things where the privatisation and electricity came to mind. I see there's an underlying issue here, unless I'm mistaken, but that's to move down the track of government, or the whole of government taking over the water and then possibly privatising water, which I think would be absolutely detrimental to our capacity as a region and as a nation or as a state to provide for our ratepayers. And I'm very, very sceptical, but I wholeheartedly agree with the report that we've submitted. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Further comments, councillors? Councillor Southwell.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Betts. I was also very supportive in providing a response to this, and it does have that feel about it that it could be going that direction. I think our response was well written and highlights really just so many of the costs involved in, especially those capital works and some of the big infrastructure projects that we've had to do, particularly in our rural and remote communities. So I'm glad we are putting in a response. We're having our say, and it's good to know that we're doing that. And I guess for our ratepayers as well out there, like these are the types of things that come up all the time, where it's kind of out of our everyday operations and activities, and where we may have staff shortages, but we have to write lengthy reports around these types of inquiries that happen. So well done to the staff involved in putting this together. Thanks.
Further comments, councillors? There being no further comments, I'll just make one comment. Well done to Bruce and the team. I think funding for the models for local water utilities is going to get more important for us into the future, with the parameters around water quality changing. And with those changes are going to come more cost for local government and local water utilities. The other thing is, of course, water security. And with the focus on water security, the way it is at the moment, the costs that are going to impact on local water utilities in next year, the year after, in 5 years' time, is going to be massive. So the funding that we're talking about here, an alternative funding, is something that really needs to be considered. And of course, look for options for local water utilities like ourselves, but in particular for water utilities at smaller local governments where they just don't have the capacity or the ability to actually do what's got to be done into the future without a lot of help. Councillors, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Councillors, we'll move to item 8.3. Could I have a move and a seconder, please? Move Councillor Coates, second to Councillor Betts. Councillor Coates.
Mr Mayor, can I ask that part 5 of this item actually be deferred as part of the discussion? Now, item 5 is the proposed childcare centre on Kalala Lane and the right-hand turn lane. And I believe that this particular development application will be coming before council, and I feel the right-hand turn lane may need to be considered as part of the bigger picture in terms of this application.
So, Councillor Coates, you've moved the recommendation as printed. Do you want to move the recommendation with that amendment?
With that amendment, yes.
No. Would you like to move that recommendation as printed with deletion of item 5?
Yes, if that will achieve.
That's a better way of doing it.
Thank you.
Mr Mayor, I wouldn't recommend the deletion. I would say defer approval of the installation, because otherwise it won't accurately reflect what has actually come from the committee.
Yes.
So let's get this right then. You're happy to move that with that?
Deferral of accepting.
The approval.
Okay. Have you got a seconder that supports that?
Okay, yeah.
All good. Okay. Those that wish to speak against the recommendation? Anyone wish to make comment on that recommendation? Councillor Ryder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, 100% agree with Councillor Coates. That looked like we were putting the cart before the horse, before the actual project that's intended to benefit come before council. And I realise that sometimes working groups' decisions don't necessarily align with each other, but this would have been a real glaring problem if, in a couple of weeks' time, when that does come before council, we do a reversal of that and oppose that childcare centre.
Thanks, Councillor Ryder. Further comments, councillors? There being no further comments, I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. We'll move on to item 8.4. Councillor Burke.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move this recommendation with a change in item 2F, where the lease period is set down for 10 years. I'd like to have that changed to 5. If I can get a seconder, please, Mr Mayor.
Second to Councillor Coates. So, councillors, that recommendation has been moved as printed, with F changing from 10 to 5 years. Do you wish to speak any further to that, councillor?
Oh, look, just briefly, Mr Mayor, this is a very liquid space, a very fast-moving space, this EV situation, and in particular, a 10-year lease with regards to that particular being taken up from council to the provider. I think things might change in that time dramatically, but certainly I think the whole motion itself has been more thought out, it's been workshopped. There's no doubt about that EV market has grown from single percentage figures to 12 or 13%, whatever the number is, in terms of the total new vehicle sales. It's quite an incredible market that's growing. I'm not sure if it's reflected in Tamworth like it is in the major metropolitan areas, but I think that we've got to move with the times and make sure we have provision, and in particular with our tourism market, so that we're not going to find people don't come to Tamworth because there's no EV charging station here. Mr Mayor, it can't be lost at this opportunity just to briefly comment with regards to there's a lot of incentives out there for people to transition away from combustion engines to electric vehicles, including the fact that they don't pay a road users tax, and I think that there's stamp duty exemptions as well. I know it's not part of the motion, but it's not lost in terms of the timeliness to draw the attention to that through this through moving this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Burke. Further comments, councillors? Councillor Southwell.
Yeah, just briefly, I'd like to agree with my fellow councillors' comments. I think that we are moving with the times here. It'd be very easy just to do nothing in this space. Oh no, that's not our area. We're just going to sit on our hands. There's already been some private companies in Tamworth that are also moving into this space in order to capture the tourist dollar. And I think it is supporting a lot of our other strategies internally in terms of our environmental goals, sustainability and so forth. So as a council, we've moved into this sort of space with some of our fleet, and it makes sense that as a community, we're also supporting community members that may want to charge their vehicles as they are passing through. I don't think many locals will be probably taking up this, because a lot of them will have the facilities in their own home. So it really is about capturing tourists. It's really a win-win for council here, because yes, we're providing the space, but there's basically no fee that the ratepayer will be there's nothing council will be actually paying. This is all going to be charged to the provider, and obviously the community member or the tourist passing through will have to pay to utilise the service. So I think it's a move in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to seeing it come into fruition. Thank you.
Councillor Biggs.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm going to vote against this recommendation because, yes, we're moving towards EVs, but I'm not sure whether the goals will be met. But it goes back to what one of my mantras, an unfunded mandate. And I can't support losing 12 local car parks in our CBD for people to come and charge a vehicle for 20 minutes that's sort of itinerant when there are other options. There are car yards or service stations and other private entities that I think should be providing that transition to EV. I just cannot support it in that way. Yes, we've taken, I think it's 18 car spaces with our tree planting, which I am totally in favour of. But you take those extra car parks out of the CBD, it's going to have a huge impact on our locals. And we're desperate in the CBD for parking for our local community. So because of the impact on our locals, I am going to oppose this recommendation. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
I apologise, councillors. Following Councillor Burke's speech, I should have asked whether the councillors wish to speak against it, and I failed to do that, so thanks, Councillor Betts. Any further comments, councillors? Councillors?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In some respects, I agree very much with Councillor Betts, but I can also see the benefit of having the charging stations in Tamworth. One of my concerns is that there was mention that there would not be any disability access for one of them, and that does concern me in terms of people being able to, we need to have access for all kinds of drivers, not just those that are quite able. But I think the other thing too is if we're going to allow this to happen, we need to be ensuring that these people that are going to set up these recharging stations are actually paying for it, because I believe that, for them it's a commercial venture, and we need to ensure that we are treating their placing these stations in our city as a commercial venture as well. So I will be supporting it with the amendment, but I'm only on the proviso that we're actually going to charge what we're talking about for the services.
Councillors, first of all, it's a motion. There was no amendment to it. It was a motion for change.
The change, yeah.
Further comments, councillors?
Just a question, Mr. Mayor. So I missed a part of the workshop, I didn't ask. So people that use these will not be paying any parking fee when they turn up to charge their vehicles, is that?
Councillor Rodder, the proponents that might put EV charging stations in a car park will, with this recommendation, if it's passed, will be paying an amount of money for the use of that car park, and then we'll be paying an annual charge of $2,000 per year, which would make up for that. They will collect that money when you go and charge your electric car and put your credit card against the machine. You'll be paying for that way.
No, I understand that. It was the electric car owner. Do they pay a parking fee when they turn up?
Yes, they do. That's what I just said. So if you're an electric car owner and you pull up at that charging station,
you mentioned that
if the NRMA, for example, or a particular proponent has entered into an agreement with council for that car space, they are going to pay for that car space. They are going to pay for it in two ways. They're going to pay 50% upfront relevant charge, and they're also going to pay an annual charge of $2,000 a year, and that is the car parking fees that you're talking about. When you go and charge your car up, they will charge you extra money for the use of that car park. So we'll be getting it through the proponents that are putting the charging station in place. They will be collecting that money back in some form or another, I would assume, back through how they charge the people charging their cars. Councillor Tickle.
I certainly support the motion, and I've supported charging stations for many years, including the one we've currently got in CWA Park. However, I do support them paying for it, and I know what Councillor Rodder is getting at. So I was just not quite clear on that too. So they pay an upfront charge of 50% of the relevant charge, so that's roughly $10,000. So when do they pay the other $10,000? Is that the $2,000 a year?
No, they will be paying
So there's 20.
The normal charge, and I might ask Bruce to clarify this, but the normal charge through our contributions.
Because as I read that, but I was getting I thought that was fair enough if they have to be charged $20,000, which is the same any developer gets charged for using a CBD space. And then I read on, oh, it's $2,000. So I assumed that was for the privilege of using that totally for them, as opposed to a developer who might be developing a block of units and they've got to pay $20,000 for a parking spot. However, they don't have exclusive use of that parking spot. So I just wonder, what's it going to be? $20,000 in total to stop, and that's what I think you're going to
$20,000. It's a one-off charge and it's $2,000 a year. But Bruce, do you want to comment
it's
on that?
$10,000.
So I don't know how so just say that someone comes along and says they want to use 2 of our existing car parking spaces to put 1 EV charging space in. Now that gets to Councillor Coates' message about disabled parking. They have to be a bit bigger to allow that. So let's just say they're going to take 2 of our car parking spaces for 1 EV charging. Under this policy, as it currently stands, or what council's adopted, it's only going on public display, but they will be charged 2 by 50% of the current charge that is levied on developers up front, and then every year they will be charged $2,000 per car park. So that's one of those for every year after that.
Yeah, I'll get that. But basically, that's it. They don't pay anything more and they've got exclusive use of it. So altogether they would be paying. So for how many years do they pay that? 5 years or 2 years?
So they pay, sorry, Mr Mayor, they pay an upfront charge once, they never pay that again.
Well, I understand.
And then for every year of the lease, they pay $2,000. And sorry, I'll correct myself, it's $2,000 per car park. So if they take away 2 to put 1 in, they pay $2,000 each.
So
on the life of the lease.
So if it's a 5-year lease, which we've just said to do, so if my math's correct, 5 2's 10, so all up they pay $20,000 for 5 years.
So it'd be 4,000.
Okay, so then what happens after that? They then keep paying 2,000. So basically they're using the space for it. Whereas a developer uptown pays $20,000 for their privilege, but they don't have exclusive use of it.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I'm not sure they're not using the space for free. If the car park was still there now, then we would receive $2,000 a year in car parking fees from the use of that car park. So by adopting this, the council's saying, well, we're still going to get our $2,000 a year as if the car park was not going to be used for EV charging, and on top of that, the proponent has to pay 50% of the current developer charge on top of that as an upfront.
I understand all of that, but they're using it exclusively, whereas a developer could have to pay for the privilege and someone would be still feeding the meter with the $20 or $40 an hour. That's what I'm saying. So that's what I understand Councillor Rodder's comment probably was too. But anyway, so be it.
I don't know how we
Councillor Tickle, I think the difference in that situation is that so a developer makes a contribution for the car parking based on the generation, the activity that the development will generate. And you're right, they don't get a dedicated car park, but once they've paid that fee, they can use any car park that's provided by in the whole of the CBD. So the developer has paid a one-off contribution rather than having to build a car park on their own premises, and then their customers can park anywhere in any of the parking. So
perhaps have to pay.
Yes, but we are getting a fee from these people to pay for the use of a car park. Correct.
So just to get really confusing, and I have on my phone the ePark app. I pull up currently into a car park, go on the app and spin the little wheel and provide how many minutes I want to stay at that place. So the new electric car owner turns up to one of these and doesn't pay that anymore.
No, because it's already been paid on their behalf by the person that's provider.
So I just think from matters of equity in terms of people that don't have electric vehicles, that you can imagine that, and it might be captured in public consultation that they may say this is a little. There's a bit of an inequity here that if you're affluent enough to own an electric vehicle, you don't have to pay, but if you own a petrol combustion engine, you have to pay.
No, but Councillor Rodder, what you will be doing, the company that puts the charging station there will be charged for the use of their car park. they're not going to cop that themselves. They will charge people to go and use that facility. So they'll be paying, not directly but indirectly, they'll be paying indirectly too.
That's.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Further conversation? Did you want to?
No, that's exactly.
It's all right.
Further comments, councillors? I'll put the recommendation, all those in.
Chair,
Sorry.
point of order, can I exercise my right of reply?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I just think it's important to note that my fellow learned colleague, Mr Councillor Betts, said that those parking spots will be lost, but in effect, electric vehicles will be parked in them, so they're not lost. We are losing the capacity to have 12, which would be more likely to be 6, but I assure you that they won't be lost. There'll be cars parked in those, and not a complete loss to our council-owned car parks.
So councillors, I'll put that recommendation as printed with that change to it. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you. Councillors, we'll move on to item 9.1. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Cade, seconded Councillor Southwell. Councillor Cade, you wish to speak to that?
Just to say, Mr Mayor, that once again I want to acknowledge the work done by Council's Financial Services and note that the council investments portfolio has returned above industry average again, so well done.
Thank you. Speakers against? Further comments? No further comments. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. We'll move to item 9.2. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved. Councillor Cade, seconded. Councillor Betts, do you want to speak to that?
Very quickly. Once again, I just want to acknowledge that these committees play an invaluable role in our communities and the maintenance of a lot of our community halls and that. And just noting that some of the reports from that it's great to see the Loombra War Memorial Hall doing events like Loombra's Got Talent. I'm really sorry I missed out on that one. Which also invited new residents along. And then the Manila Matters, they've been running things such as Lego Day and Halloween, all things for young people. So, and the Payalamore Recreation Reserve trivia nights and Melbourne Cup days, etc. So, once again, thank you to all those volunteers that are involved in looking after some of our assets and providing events in their communities.
Anyone wish to speak against that recommendation? Further comments on the recommendation? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. We'll move from there on to 9.3. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Southwell.
I'd like to move the amended motion, please.
You'd like to move the motion as printed, including
With the additional.
with the
Yeah.
additional. So
Yes,
it's
please.
not an amended motion, it is a motion including those two.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Betts.
Mr Mayor, can I just advise the councillors, so obviously these will form Roman numerals 8 and 9 as opposed to 1 and 2 on the printed copy, and they will both lead in with authorise the motion, that as per the other items in the report.
Councillor Southwell, do you wish to speak to that?
Yes, please, just briefly, because I think the motion as it stands is very good. There's lots of different items here, and some of the other councillors may wish to speak to them. The additional points that I've raised here, just briefly, I did want to mention. The first one is that we call on the Australian government to enable the desexing of all adoptable cats that are handed into a pound to reduce the significant impact that cats have on Australia's biodiversity. So we'd like the Australian government to fund that desexing throughout Australia. That's what we're calling for here. Keeping in mind that these are motions that will be going to the conference, whether or not they get up is another matter. Just briefly speaking on that particular one is that council does have a role to play in managing our environment and our biodiversity. In the last 12 months, as many of my fellow councillors will know, we've had a lot of discussion around cats. There's been lots of chat about all the different elements of cats, and when you take it all the way back to the bare essentials, if you can reduce the amount of cats, which is the desexing part, it solves a lot of problems later on. So that's where that comes through. I'm not a cat hater. However, we need to manage the numbers for our biodiversity. Very simple. The other one that I've added in, just briefly again, I guess local government is a major employer in Australia, and overall we provide employment for over 190,000 Australians across 400 occupations. And part of the ALGA briefing was that the briefing paper that we're writing these from has said, how can local governments partner with the Australian government to employ more apprentices and traineeships? So this is really about helping local government to actually fund more apprentices and traineeships. What this in turn hopefully will do, if it was approved, is it'll help us with our jobs and skills shortages that are constraining our capacity to deliver services and build and maintain local infrastructure. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Southwell. Anyone wishing to speak against that recommendation? Further comments on the recommendation? Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to go through everything that I've written. I think they're fairly self-explanatory in terms of selling a family home and trying to keep those funds quarantined so it doesn't impact people's pensions. I think that has a fairly significant impact on decisions around that. Number 7, I understand and I recognise that health is not part of the local government remit, but advocating for our community is, as far as I'm concerned, and if we can put that up and it's accepted and looked at, then people all throughout the regional and rural areas will benefit. And the third one for me, or number 7, come about because of discussions I was having with some of our local community groups, and in particular the Model Railway Club. And a lot of those visitor attracting events are now finding it very, very difficult to actually pay their insurances. And if we can get some sort of subsidisation from the federal government or recognition of the cost of that for them, and hopefully support those organisations to keep providing the tourist attractions that they do, then I feel that would be a benefit. Thank you.
Further comments, councillors? There being no further comments, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Councillors, we'll move from there on to 9.4, Annual Operational Plan. Move Councillor Betts, seconded Councillor Burke. Want to speak to that, Councillor Betts? Anyone wish to speak against that? Any further comments? There being no further comment on that, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Councillors, we'll move now into item 10, which is community services. We have no matters in that item. We now move to item 11, reports to be considered in closed council. Mr. General Manager, anyone who wants to have any of those items in closed council heard in open council?
No, Mr Mayor.
Is there anyone within the audience wishing to have the matter in closed council reported in open council? Councillors, could I get someone to move that we move into closed council? Councillor Burke, seconded Councillor Coates. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all for attending. Mr General Manager, if you can report on the findings in closed council.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, this is a report of the closed session of the ordinary council meeting held on the 26th of March 2024. In closed council this evening, you considered one item. The resolution for that item is as follows. I'll just show Mr Mayor, I'll just pull it back up. That in relation to the report E053/2024, expression of interest, possible lease of land at 8 Reservoir Road, Manila, Council 1, receive and note the report. 2, proceed to lease the land as per the expression of interest received with conditions as per the report. And 3, undertake further investigations for the future development of the land. That's the report.
Councillors, could I have a motion to accept? Councillor Southwell, second to Councillor Burke. All those in favour say aye. Aye. The meeting's closed. Thank you.